King Zarkon. How's it going, dude?
What's up, Dove? I feel like I've been on here a little too much today.
You're better at this than I am. Like,
I saw your Biden dance moves. I can't be better than that.
I don't know, dude. It's like, I just, I listen to all your interviews and you're so excited and upbeat and like, yeah. And then I just like talk to people and I just want to like kill myself after the end of each one. So let's try and keep this upbeat. All right, let's start out. Just can you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do and how we can find you.
Yep. I'm Abraham. I am the now proud owner of Barbarian Rage trading cards. I run Yucko Toys and Toys on Tap, and you can find me at both of those Instagrams.
Nice. So before we get to Toys on Tap, because that's a whole nother contribution to the scene that you've created, you're the one that's usually doing this, like interviewing other people. So I think it's interesting, like now people get to hear about you.
Yeah.
Unless you do like a killer bootlegs where you devote a whole episode to yourself and you just start at the beginning and at the end you're just crying and like and then I just
yeah,
I don't know, that's hard to do. So so where did this all start? I mean, being an artist, I think the theme of what we talk about here is like art is sort of like this difficult road and people find it. Like how old were you? When did you find it?
I mean, doing kind of like creative things. I've always needed that. I can tell when I don't have that creative outlet, I become like, my fuse shortens, I become angrier, like I just need some kind of creative whatever. And I realized that real little when I used to set up my toys in like creative ways, and that would be my like outlet when I was really little. And then I would do this dumb thing where I would like close my door and peer through the crack to see if they would come alive like Toy Story. But I wasn't an artist. I failed art classes going through high school and middle school because I don't know how to draw a fucking eyeball. Like so I can't do that. And they never had art that was like, that looked like me. So I like art was just not my thing for so long.
So when how old were you when you realized that, I mean, fine, like you have a need to be creative, like you couldn't draw, like drawing is not all of creativity. Like that's what most people equate with creativity, but creativity could be anything. So what made you put two and two together and realize that like you had to have a creative outlet to make the rest of your life be okay?
Probably right when I got to college, because I was like 18 turning 19, and I just like I had all this excess energy. And so I was looking for any way to do, like I went to a small private Christian university, so I started helping design background stuff for those chapels, or I helped helping set up they had like a battle stage fighting reenacting class. I would help start setting that stuff up. I took a bunch of different creative writing classes, and I realized that as I was doing those things, I was under the most stress, but I felt most at peace.
Wow. I mean, that's a super young age to really like come to that conclusion. I mean, I know people like pushing 50 who've still not like come to terms with that. And so what happens to you when you don't have a creative outlet?
Oh, I'm a mess. Like I don't know that I've ever experienced depression, but the closest I get to that, or the closest I get to anxiety, or the closest I get to like breakdown status or burnout is when I don't have any kind of creative outlet. Like if my normal job takes over, I'm a mess because I have nothing else on the other side that's mine.
And do the people around you, are they aware of this too? I mean, is your wife aware of this? Like, do they see like, hey, you better like go do something creative, you're being a dick, like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, she says it probably pretty much like that. Yeah, my work is super aware of it. That's why like they have allowed, I have a facility, so they've allowed me to paint in there and get other artists to come in. I have a whole hallway. One side is cassette tapes all over the walls. The other side is VHS tapes. Upstairs, like if I'm working with my hands and being creative, I've built ball pits and stages, and I have cassette cases all over the like. So they let me run free in my area.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, how d- how did how did action figures and resin toy making and creating, how did action figure become like your current medium of choice?
By
I mean,
accident.
I guess maybe that's not your only medium. It sounds like you have a lot of creative things you do, but like, can you tell me the journey of like how you discovered that even action figures was a possibility?
Yeah, I there was a guy, he goes by Nicholas Danger. He's a painter in San Diego.
Mhm.
And I just on a whim, I messaged him to come paint in the facility. And as he was painting, he talked about going to like, I didn't know what it was at the time, but going to Designer Con.
Mhm.
And he had said that he saw a guy named Sucklord that made a bunch of little whatever. And at the time, again, didn't mean anything. And then he talked about doing head swaps with homies and with like Green Army men.
Mhm.
And so I did a quick Instagram search, saw Sucklord, and then it just unraveled. And then when I first started doing toys, I was really attached to Death by Toys,
Mhm.
how he just finds things sometimes and throws them in a blister.
Sure.
My first couple toys were just that. Like I think I made one of the people that died from Free Willy or Shamu or whatever. Like I put
Mhm.
body parts in an orca whale in the blister.
Mhm.
And it was like that started this progression of like, oh, I can make anything. And then just start from that was like March of 2020.
March of 2020. So it's 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. So you sort of like launched into this career like very quickly. Um, that's that's phenomenal. So like in 2 years, all right. So let's get to, and then you started the podcast, and
Yeah.
then so like in 2 years, you've sort of gone from like discovering this is a medium, starting to become a creator, putting your stuff out there and selling it, and then starting your own podcast and interviewing everyone in the scene, and then becoming like a staple in the scene where everyone knows who you are.
Yeah. I mean, I have an addictive personality. So like I have to watch if I drink too much alcohol, or if I smoke a cigarette, what's to stop me from smoking a pack of cigarettes, right?
Right,
So I make one toy, what's to stop me from working on 30 toys?
right.
Yeah,
It's, you seem like you have boundless energy.
it's a problem.
It's a so what is it about, what of all the creative things that you get to do to find this creative outlet, what is it about the action figure medium? Like, how does that compare to the other stuff? And I I know, like, and I've heard you talk about it on your podcast a lot about how this is like a side gig for you, and
Yeah.
that you don't think you could do it full time. Um, of all the creative things that you do, like where does this sort of rank?
Um, I mean, it's my favorite. There's something about an uphill battle,
Mhm.
right? Like this is not an art form to everyone. And there's something about making like I experience the same thing with my job, right? Like the things that I do at work, people are like, oh, you're that type of person.
Mhm.
And I don't love that idea that someone can box you in.
Mhm.
And I think with toys, you make an art toy. I make something like Bob A. Fett.
Mhm.
It's weird. And then tell people about it and just getting
Mhm.
their reaction and then walking them through that. There's something that about this art form, because it is still so kind of new,
Mhm.
that it's better than anything. When I first started like trying to figure out what I wanted to do for art,
Mhm.
at one point I was disassembling VHS cases and repainting them so that other people can do spool swaps. I just wanted to do the weird shit.
Wow. And then you said you made a wall of that?
Not a wall of those ones. I made actually, here's a fun little trivia fact. I work with a youth group, and it is in that facility that there's a wall of VHS tapes. I got them all from one Russian guy somewhere in San Diego. So we started doing, I mean, that didn't age well, right? We started,
Hey, VHS is hip now.
well, the
Like
Russian part didn't age well. So we started like looking at some of the little stickers on them and trying to figure out what they were. So we did Google Translate. Three of them, he had 3 copies of them, is Little Man, Big Penis. So
wow.
it's awesome. I got Russian porn on my walls.
That's amazing. So you keep referring to your job. Can you tell us what you actually do?
Yeah. This is the first time that I've actually said anything about it on some kind of interview. I'm actually a pastor.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you, is there any and do is that like a separate life? I mean, do the people who you work for know that you make toys? Has there been a, I mean, this is probably the only place you'll ever talk about this, and no one will
Yeah.
ever see this, so it doesn't matter. But is that, are those separate lives or do they cross?
The best way to describe like who you're talking to right
Mhm.
now, that's the only part that goes between them. Like I'm the same person in both.
Mhm.
It's tough to mesh them, like they just don't. Plus I make a lot of toys that bag on Christians.
Mhm.
So it's just easier to not have those go together.
So do you feel that 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 the job stifles your creativity,
Uh, it is the
or
source that stifle it.
but is that because if you're making something that's critical,
Yeah.
is that what's pushing the criticism, or was that sort of already there?
Uh, I mean, being like working in this, I know how batshit crazy Christians sound most days.
Mhm.
Like I understand the crazy stuff that's happened, and the stuff that goes on all over the US and all over the world because of what I'm a part of. And so I think drawing attention to that and bringing some kind of art to that, like I thrive from that piece or from
Mhm.
that. Like my favorite, I didn't make it. I got it from Kozik. It's 2 praying hands with money in between. It's to let us pray.
I have one of those. Yeah, those are good.
Yeah, and it was in my office for the longest time until my boss was like, "Hey, maybe we move that." And I just I have a Rika Stormy on a cross. I've made some, like, I don't know, like this is, if you can't joke about the things that you're a part of, or if that doesn't like somehow make it into that creative spark,
Right.
then it's going to tear me apart.
Sure. I mean, I've never understood, if you go anywhere around the world, there's always like a dominant culture in any, if you draw a border and you say, what is you know, the dominant culture here? Like, and it's like the dominant culture, it seems like it's always okay to make fun of the dominant culture
Yeah.
because it's the dominant culture. And then, but you're right, there are certain people from those dominant cultures that cannot accept criticism in any way. Like, I don't know, like we have another toy that, this time called White Tears that Nixter Production made.
Yeah.
And I'm not offended by it. It's like, if I'm offended by it, then it was meant to offend. I become part of the group of
Yeah.
who was to be offended, right? But if I'm not offended, then I can, I get it.
Yeah.
I get what that means. So in your work, do you have a lot of colleagues that are like-minded, or are you sort of like the black sheep?
Man, I mean, I'm outspoken.
Mhm,
I'm like stubborn and strong-headed. And I say stuff like, I don't like the status quo, right? So
mhm,
on the middle school campus that's nearest the church that I work at, like I helped run their gay club on campus.
mhm,
I'm very outspoken about support for Black Lives Matter. And I have friends that are gay that have asked me to marry, that like those types of things. Like, it is very uncomfortable for the people that I work with,
mhm.
but they understand that, like, I work with students, and so like I don't know, they look like me and I look like them. Like, I'm a part of the culture because it makes sense that, like, I don't want to be one of those cookie cutter like Christian people that seem to cause destruction.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, they get a little upset when I say fuck in the office. Like, there's those pieces, right? But I just don't look like them. So it's a
But
little tough.
right, but that's not a religious thing, right? I mean, it doesn't actually say in the Bible, like, don't say fuck.
I mean, people mistranslate it all the time. Whenever they want to say, they're like, man, don't say that. It's in this book. Yeah, you're a horse's ass. No, it's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my favorite part of religion is the ability to just pick and choose what you want to believe, and
Yeah.
translate whatever you want into whatever works, and conveniently ignore everything else.
Yeah, I think that's the reason that there's so much craziness is, instead of seeing the God that they follow, they're creating a God that looks like them. And
Mhm.
that's the problem, right? Like, the
Mm,
God that you're trying to follow should never look like you. If he does, we have a different issue.
right. Wow. That's some heavy shit, dude.
We're
Uh,
gonna keep it lively.
yeah. And so I guess my next question is, like, how this affects your work as an artist. But I guess, hmm,
I mean, I've balanced out. I can
right.
say
So
that. When I started, I tried to create a Jim Jones Kool-Aid figure. I tried to
yeah,
do those things just to see if I could push boundaries, but I balanced out, and now I'm making like the Boba Fett one, or I have like a funny Jesus one coming out on Easter. Like, I'm balancing out more.
got it. So, and then how, you know, Scott has a question. What's your
Scott, let's
question,
do
Scott?
it.
um, Working for the church, but
Yeah.
also being critical of it
Yeah.
outside as like a second job, or like, isn't that a conflict? Or could that be seen as a conflict of interest?
Absolutely. I think the problem is, I work for a church that is, I don't know, like, they have the legalism and all the like fundamentalism and all that stuff. And I don't align with all those things. And I try my best to critique the things that stupid people believe, right? Like, there's a guy, he's never going to watch this type of thing. So there's a guy that attends here that told me that dinosaurs are not real and that the fossils are Satan trying to distract us. I don't believe that. Evolution is 100% what I fall into. Like, I love that, and I see how beautiful that is. And I told him, like, hey, maybe we don't talk about this because I think that was a stupid statement. And so, like,
I'm saying, like, if I worked somewhere and then
yeah,
I was critical of that place outside of the workplace, that could be a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I think that it is
and possibly get fired.
Oh, I mean, they know how critical I am of it. And I also know my audience. So if I'm talking to congregation people, like, or if I'm on the news, maybe I don't say certain stuff. But what I can say is growth can never happen without criticism. Like, I will never be able to push a congregation to love their community better if I don't critique the ways that they have fallen short. And so from the outside perspective is that, like, one, I love just poking fun at like Christians in general, and then they find out what I do. But then two, if we believe these stodgy ideas and these critical things about other people, how do we grow from that? How can I criticize that or call them to task so that they realize how dumb those things are? Hope that answered it, Scott.
I think the answer to Scott's question is he don't give a shit. Right? I think what you're saying is that you're going to be yourself, and you found a way to survive in a group of people who it sounds like they accept you for who you are. Right?
Yeah.
They might push back, but you'd hope that they recognize you for what you have to offer, and that that this blind dogma is not gonna get, from you, is not gonna get anywhere. So
Yeah.
they must really like you.
Like, I get a lot of stuff done for them, right? Like, on top of doing what I do for toys and stuff, like I help run the family art center for an art and wine festival that happens here. I volunteer at the school. I do all the other stuff outside for them and the community. And so, like, I hold a voting seat at 2 schools. I hold a seat at the La Jolla Community Center or whatever. Like, I go to those town hall meetings. Like, I just want to affect change at a different level, and they respect that part. But they also leave me at my level, right? There's a reason I work with middle school students and not the entire congregation.
So is that your choice or theirs?
Both, but they also are very clear on, like, hey, maybe you're too crazy to put on the stage on a Sunday.
And so what would happen if I see?
Yeah.
So
I've been up there before, and I can tone it in and like reel it in, but
do you want to be up there?
I
mean, are you sad that, like, you don't get to do that, or you've found like your niche where, like, you can be yourself, kind
of? I don't like working with older people. Like, they're so stuck in their ways. It's easy for me to convince a kid to just be a good person, right? Like, the goal is for me just to have them love people well.
Right.
And so it's so tough for me to get an older person to see how, like, hey, maybe we don't use certain terminology. Maybe you don't say the N-word or say something stupid.
Oh gosh.
Right? Like, but for a kid, it's easy to get them to say, oh, Abe, you're right. Maybe I won't say that anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, religion's fine if it helps you, but I think at the core of it, you're saying just, like, don't be a dick.
Yes, that's all that Jesus ever talked about. He said, don't be a dick to people.
Oh man. So let's get back to the podcast, because the podcast, you're at this point, you're how many episodes in?
50, I think 59, not including all the bonus episodes that have come through.
So after talking to all of these artists, like, is there anything that you've gleaned from the scene? Have you come to any conclusions yourself about yourself as an artist, or the scene itself, like, after you've, like, talked to all these people? Is there a takeaway?
Yeah, I think the thing that I come back to the most, like, I've had people, critical people, right? They'll send a message like, you don't know shit about toys, maybe don't do the podcast. And it's like, after all these episodes, they're not wrong. Like, I still don't know a bunch about toys. I didn't ever really collect. I just played with them and then got rid of them and had some sort of a collective thing. Um, but I'm learning like more and more through everyone's process and everyone going through all their stuff. And that I like, there's so much about toy making that I have no clue about. There's so much about toys in general that I don't know. I'm constantly learning about the stupid intricacies. That's why I've latched on to the Barbie Liberation Organization so hard, because it was so new and weird that it was just like I wanted to dive into every crevice of that.
Yeah, that story about that is fascinating. Just how mainstream toys affect the culture, and the toys that are seemingly okay for kids to play with,
Yeah.
um that's sort of that. I guess that's American culture, is like war and violence is okay and like sex is bad. And
Yeah.
you go to other countries, you go to Europe and stuff, and it's like there's not the same stigmas against sex. And then you talk about war and give your kid a gun to play with, and they're like, whoa, what's wrong with that kid? Like they look at us like we're animals. Anything else you've gleaned from all of those interviews? Like, um, so you talk about yourself and what you've learned and how you're continuing to learn, and like most things, you sort of like realize that you don't. It's like really educated people really know how little they know, right?
Yeah.
It's uneducated people who really think they know everything.
Yeah. And I think what's tough about Toys on Tap, and this is like a behind the scenes thing, I encounter so many, I hear all the time about how, oh, the toy community is so giving, it's so welcoming, it's so great, which it is. Like, I love every part of it. But when you do interviews or when you work with people to do certain things, you start to see some of the bad things that come with it. And some of the, which isn't like, that's not problematic, because every group has whatever in it, but it's definitely like, oh, I didn't know this existed before I started.
Right. So
So
there's the outer exterior of everybody talking about themselves, and then there's all the backhanded bullshit that you get to find out about, that you or I cannot talk about on our interviews.
yeah, and I don't bring that up to anyone because I never want to. Like, I don't want to keep feeding that in, but it's always in the back of my head in every interview. It's like, are you going to be this type of person, or are you going to be this? Because it's going to.
It also doesn't fit your personality. Like, if in your interviews you started like digging dirt and talking about beefs, and I mean, I've talked about beefs in some of my interviews, but
yeah,
insofar as to make the point about how ridiculous they were and how people were fighting in the beginning, I talk a lot about the insecurity that, let's say, the Sucklord had when Killer Bootlegs came on the scene, and like the amount of hatred and scorn that he had to like wade through because people called him a ripoff artist.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just trying to be like the Sucklord. But if you look at their work, they're nothing. That comes from a very uneducated point of view, where it's like, oh, you're a painter, let's say you're Picasso, is like, and someone else decides to paint,
yeah,
and they're like, you're ripping off Picasso because you're painting. Well, no, that's not how it works. It's like, I paint what I paint, this person paints what they paint. We can both paint in the same world and everything's okay. But that was sort of the narrow view of even like good friends of mine, like, who are just like, fuck that guy. Like, he's stepping on the toes of our friend. And, it's like, whoa. And all of those people have come around. And then you see what we're doing here. I think in my database, I have at least 300 artists that I can like, and there's probably more that, I don't know. I don't know everyone. There's people starting and stopping all the time. It's hard to keep track. But, that was before it was established as like, this is a medium that everyone, everyone can play in this sandbox. Like, yes, we're all playing with sand, but we can do different things. Like if you look at this table here, like everyone has a distinct style, and I always talk about how that's the best, the best hallmark of an artist is when you can recognize somebody's style. So, and then the other beefs about like, I put a Boba Fett head on a Buddha first.
Yeah.
And you just,
okay.
And now there's like shit on this table that are like the same thing.
Yeah.
Like just done two different ways. And then the fans and the collectors, they understand the nuance. Like it's okay. It's okay that I have, my figure and your figure, it's the same thing, but my execution is different than yours. Where, so I think the scene has like evolved in that way. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, your positivity and not feeding into the garbage of it.
Yeah, because like here's a I don't know, imposter syndrome, whatever it is. You come to the table, I don't see myself at some of the levels of some of the other artists or whatever. But more than anything, like when because the scene is this big, like it is so tiny in the midst of all of art. Like a part of my personality and a part of who I am is it eats me up if I don't get along with someone in the scene. And it's not because I have to be best friends with them. It's not because like we have to work together and none of that. But the problem pieces are like, I don't want to have like offended you in a way. And I don't want us to like be so at odds that we miss the parts of the community that could be thriving if we weren't at odds. And it bums me out to think, because there's a couple artists that it's like, man, I wish we could work together. I wish we were closer. Like it's my bet. Like maybe it's my fault.
Sure.
And maybe it's yours, but I don't love the tension. I hate it.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe I'm gonna get messages after this that are like, let's fucking squash the beef then.
Yeah.
We're ignited. Yeah, I would love that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've managed to stay neutral. I have work, on a table here, and there are artists who do not like each other.
Yeah.
And they understand that I'm not choosing sides.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's the same is true of you. Like you can interview someone and then interview someone else, and you could hear two sides of a story, or like those people, like none of these people have to get along.
Right.
Right. Where it gets to be a problem is like, there was a time in designer toy distribution in my, my former career, where setting up toys at San Diego Comic-Con from different companies, and one manufacturer would come by and go, why is my stuff on the shelf under his? And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Like that's I don't want that guy's stuff anywhere near mine. It's like, it happened to me early on. Like someone threatened me and said, if you carry this guy's stuff, like I'm done with you. And I just had to sort of make the decision, like, am I going to play that game?
Yeah.
Or it's like, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You're going to do what you're going to do. And if you don't value what I have to offer, then I'm sorry, but I'm not taking sides. That was rough. That was a stressful situation. And I had sort of respect for the person who said it to me, but it was a tangible threat. Like, they were, but that all goes back to what we were saying before about early on in the scene. The earlier you go back in the scene, the more insecure people are.
Yeah.
Right now, if there's someone new who says, hey, I'm making resin toys, I'm going to do this. This is my first release. Like, is anybody threatened by that?
No.
Nobody. Like now, when someone does something fucking rad that you've never seen before, and they blow it out of the park, and then they're like, people are like, they appreciate it, and they sort of like, when I show a stupid Boba Fett joke that is amazing, and everyone's like, I can't believe I didn't think of that one. That's so stupid. Like I could have sold it, right?
Yeah.
It's like when every Boba Fett joke has been done. But it sounds like, I mean, I guess I see the parallel between your career and your day job and your toy making. Like, and I see the attitude there. It's like it's maintaining that positivity and wanting to get along. I don't know. I've seen the true Abraham. They've sort of like come together there.
Yeah.
So what so the podcast, I mean, that seems like that takes, how do you have time for all this, I guess, is the question I have. Like, you seem like you talk about the things that you do at work, and then you're doing a weekly podcast and interviews, and like that's I don't know how you do it all.
I'm a hyper extrovert,
Mhm.
and I have a hyper introvert wife who is
Mhm.
super gracious with me,
Mhm.
with like time management.
Mm.
And like when toy stuff is going awry and it's all over the house, she
Mhm.
like keeps it in until it's been a week. Then it's like, all right, maybe we pick your shit up. I think like that's why like I have different schedules for things, right? So I learned early on through trial and error with the podcast that I can't record and then release 3 weeks later. It means nothing, because they like some of the stuff could be changed or different.
Mhm.
So I only record on Mondays now. So that's why every artist interview is Monday, whatever time on that day. And then I release 1 week later. And so like I edit when I'm done on Monday, I just go home and edit. And then
Mhm.
the rest of the week is done with podcasts, and it's just promoting throughout the week.
Right.
For toy stuff, it's slowed down. Like I do whatever I can, whenever like shows with DKE or SDCC, all those things.
Mhm.
I'll put something in there, and I love doing that. But making the one-off toys that I used to make a lot,
Mhm.
that part has slowed down because commissions come in, and so I'm still trying to work on those. And
Yeah, that's a hard balance to find, because commissions are like, good paying jobs. Like it's like,
yeah,
here's guaranteed money. It's not on spec. Um, it's funny because if I don't make toys, but if I were a toy artist, I think I would be the kind of artist that would just make one-offs and never have to make anything more than once, because that seems like if there's something I can't do, right? It's sit there and do the same thing for hours on end. Like as a painter friend of mine, Robert Burden, we have some of the huge paintings here, and it's like, I spent 2,000 hours on this painting. And it's like,
yeah,
what? It's like he painted the whole underpainting, in blue, and then he just sat there and he just puts in the time. And I don't know, I I can't do that.
yeah. And I mean, like the troubling part of the podcast as well, I think
Mhm.
people don't understand this, is I shouldn't be making toys if I'm going to do the podcast, because what's happening is I'm encountering these artists that are phenomenal,
Mhm.
right? Like if I'm going to follow suit, that means I'm constantly being reminded how much I need to step my game up, right? Like I had Dan
Yes and no. I mean, look, I I'm sorry. You
O'Malley.
that no. No,
I
because if look,
yeah,
you're a creative person, you have a creative outlet of making toys. Um, yeah, if you want to step your game up, if you want to be challenged, that's great. You should be challenged. But you're also, I mean, I do agree with you that being a member of the press and trying to be impartial is hard to balance that with also being a creative person in the scene. But the scene is so small,
mhm,
right? Like, who else is going to do what you do? Like, how many people have tried? Killer Bootlegs had his thing. Suckler tried this Suck Hour. Like, trying to think what else there was. Behind the Bootleg is doing a lot of work right now, but Marsham Toy, are they still going?
Yeah, they have some.
Yeah, they're going. Toy Geeks, like Toy Geeks is only 3 times a year when I'm on. There used to be a weekly show. Like it's hard. And George Gaspar from Double G Toys, who is a great sculptor, has sculpted stuff for us. He's run into, I guess he's run into a problem because being on Toy Geeks and being on Marsham Toy Hour, they are reviewing toys. And I guess that's where you have, you're just interviewing and trying to draw people into like talking about themselves. But if you were creating toys and critiquing other people's stuff, that's where it gets really rough. Like he said some shit about, he thought that Kid Robot like phoned some shit in and did a really bad job and said it. And then Kozik heard it and he just like, this is my company, like, this is we eat, this is like, fuck you, like you're gonna criticize us, like, and it was like, George is dead to me. It's like, dude, like he is a member of, of the press, has his own opinion, like what is like, no, I was like, I see that, I see that is, so, but as a reflection of your creativity and wanting to like do stuff, I think those two things can exist. I guess that's the problem with creativity in general. And so they can track it in children, right? And so kids, they draw and whatever, and they're creative. And then there's a certain age, I forget what age that is, where in your mind you start being super hyper aware of like, what other kids think around you. And that's where the creativity drops, because you're in art class and everyone's drawing, and then Timmy over there is just fucking nailing it, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at your splotch on the paper, and then you just decide not to draw anymore. I'm not good at that, and so you stop. And so they've sort of been able to track, I wish I can quote where I read this, but where like creativity for children sort of dies. And it's when you just say, I'm not good at that, so I don't do it. And the fact that you keep doing it, and I don't know, no one wants complacency, right? You don't want to just be like, right, contentment, for artists, contentment is death, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so but you're a different person. So if you talk to Dan O'Brown and he does one thing, but when you talk to him, he doesn't have a crazy big ego about it. He kind of doesn't even understand why people like.
He's good. It's all inner stuff for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like you made a statement that you can't do. Like for you doing a lot of the same thing, that's not going to happen. So when you look over the toy scene from like this, I don't know, this point of view, I'm super new. If I choose to only do one-offs, I'm in a certain category where I'm like kind of competing, kind of not competing, and I'm keeping up with a standard and a level that is so high. So it's like, oh, maybe I don't do that. So then I do runs. But that's its own creative bundle that's so good. And then you have like any of the outside ideas. That's why I tried to do something different.
Right.
The Bob A. Fett one, because I just I couldn't figure out how to make it bigger and how to be different. And so I think being in the toy podcast, where it starts to bite me in the ass is that I'm interviewing all these different toy artists, from some that don't do runs, some that only do runs, some that And so it's like my imposter syndrome is going for 59 episodes. I've had to deal with my own psychological bullshit because I see the work that is so good, or and then I hear the artist on the other end that sometimes they're like, yeah, I don't get it. It's like, how do you not get that your work is like top notch? Has no one told you? but it's because they're struggling the same that I am sometimes.
Right, but you're in the scene, so you recognize it as great. And like,
Yeah.
there's a whole other like culture of people that just think like, oh, you make toys, you must be a pedophile.
Yeah. Like,
Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? It's like when someone was explaining to me like that all of these Japanese toy makers that come here and how they're just like, you know, celebrities, right? And
Yeah.
like back home in Japan, like these toy makers, they're like, you know, something's wrong with you, like you're a freak, like you know, it's like it's just it's yeah, all of this is like big fish in a small pond kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And
And
then you get to the rest of the world and you're like, you do what?
yeah. I think the
um
hard part too is, or like the cool part, but also the hard part, like everything that has been created from these artists, like whatever my favorite is, it's
mhm,
stuck in my head.
mm,
Like, and so now whenever I'm creating, it's like, well, I don't want to like step on toes, or I don't want to do certain things, but I love the shit out of all these different styles.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a I mean, I've sort of noticed a trend in the artists that are doing one-offs
Yeah.
tend to be doing realistic interpretations of things that exist.
Mhm.
Generally, not always. And the people who do editions of stuff tend to be more conceptual, right? Because we've talked, when I was on your show, we talked about sort of like this spectrum. Like you have
Yeah.
like Dan O'Brown, Super Secret Fun Club, and you know, Readful Things. People like who are quite often doing literal interpretations of, you know, Steve Martin from The Jerk as an action figure.
Mhm.
And you know, their work is exceptional, but the art is the transformation in their mind of this real, you know, character into 3 3/4. Like it could be a real toy in the store if someone was stupid enough to license The Jerk and try and sell it to children.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, what we discussed is like that is part of, like, we can't unfortunately sell that, right? Because that in quantity puts us at risk,
Mhm.
because they have logos and because they're using photos from movies, and that like legally is problematic. And that we're sort of in this middle ground where people are borrowing from pop culture, but really it's the concept, right? Because you could have made one Boba Fett, but it's a conceptual piece, right? So it holds up to being sold over and over again, without being licensed, I guess. I I don't know. I have to think about that. Um, I mean, it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that there are some artists, until they want to make a run of something for us and deviate from what they normally do, that we don't get to work with them. Um, you know, I talked to Dystopian Customs. Like, I have a bunch of his stuff. I think it's great. I personally, as a collector, I think collecting one-offs is hard,
Yeah.
right? And for me to buy a one-off, it has to like just completely blow me out of the water, right? And then
Yeah.
if it does, then my reaction is like, oh, you should make 20 of these, right? But
Mhm.
Dystopian said, like, he's like, I can't, I just do one-offs, right? So I what I told him is if you want to do a run for us, come up with a concept that, whatever it's called, and then all 20 are different.
Mhm.
So you could do 20 one-offs, but it can be, right, because it comes down to marketing, right? I still have to advertise. I have to get people behind this. I can't do all that work just to sell one figure.
Yeah.
I have to try and get 20 people to buy it, at least 20 people, right? So yeah, that's it's a rough it's rough. And I fear, and I talk about this a lot, is the influence of like my financial restraints to make this viable. I feel like pushes the scene in one direction, and I'm not always sure that that is good.
Mm,
Do you know what I'm saying? That because people want to
Yeah.
participate, they have to sort of conform to what financially works,
yeah. And I
right?
think what is so interesting, I saw another artist a long time ago that was talking about how conventions are bullshit, like all the different fees that come.
Mhm.
But we pay fees for everything, regardless if we like it or not. Like we have to shell out money for everything.
Sure. I mean, there's a cost for everything, whether
Yeah.
it's emotional or physical or, resources. Sure. That artist that you're talking about, there's a lot that that person doesn't understand
Mhm.
about life, I think. So, or really, I, because all of those statements they were all over the place and contradictory. So it's
Yeah.
like, um, you know, I if what I tell people that make stuff for us to sell is that the reason you're doing it is for the promotion.
Yeah.
It's really the only thing that we have to offer. It's not the money, right? It's not
Yeah.
you know, it's the exposure and creating a platform for people, especially people starting out, to really get some attention, to really be able to make something of quality and like knock it out of the park and get people to like pay attention. I think that's all I have to offer, because I think once artists get to a certain level, like you don't see Sucklord or Healy or Killer Bootlegs making a lot of stuff for us. They don't need to.
Yeah.
It's not like they can if they want to. Um, they have in the past. I'm sure they will in the future. But we're sort of a place. We're sort of like an incubator and like launching pad for a lot of people just starting out, trying to like make a name for themselves, and that's okay. And like once they get to the point where they don't need us, that's the point where I can start making toys for them, like the Sucklord, where if his prices are up here, I can make additions for him that are down, in the kind of affordable area where he's not necessarily putting his hands on it. So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, all right, dude. I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate all that you do,
Thank
your
you.
enthusiasm. What'd you call it? A hyper
Extrovert.
a hyper extrovert.
Yeah.
That is like my worst nightmare, dude.
Yeah.
Dude, I listened to this whole TED talk about extroverts and introverts and
Gotta
how
go check it out.
society is totally geared for extroverts to succeed, and
Yep.
how the introverts like don't get promotions and don't get jobs, and society has completely changed, right? Like 200 years ago, what was valued in society was, and they cited all the names of the books, like the introspective man, who smokes his pipe and sits at the fire and reads a book, and it's like no, that's like out the fucking window. It's like the introvert, the one that's like, who's there, it's like in your face, like what's
Yeah.
going on, like that's the person who gets the most sales, that's the person who gets the job, that's the person who like, and then I'm just in the corner like me. Toys, do you want to buy some of my toys? Ian says I know how to assert myself.
Yeah.
That
That's how you got all of us.
that took a long time though. That took a long, like, and who am I asserting myself to? Right? I am asserting myself to an artist who's like, I need to like hold them to their, commitments and say, I need you to deliver this on time. And like, when you're working, that's one thing. But like, I wish I had a good example for you. Um, that's been a lifelong fight to like, uh, to not hold it in and just sit there and be angry and just say what you feel, and not worry that like it's going to blow up in your face. Like, but yeah, well, I congratulate you. I think your level of awareness, like the age at which you recognize your need for creativity, most people, just how you know yourself, like that seems like just such a gift. Like, and the fact that you're able to do all this work, like, you know, uh, working with kids and doing the the podcast, and like it seems like you're always giving back. And I just really appreciate it. So
Thanks, Dev.
hey man, thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.
I'll talk to you soon. Oh, great interview. Really a lot of fun.